Before we begin, let me ask you something. What if I told you that the richest human being in history was not European, not American, and not modern, but African? Not only African, but a ruler whose wealth was so vast that it reshaped economies across continents. If you enjoy discovering the true stories of Africa's past, consider subscribing, because this channel exists to tell the stories history often ignores. This is the story of the Mali Empire, and the man whose name echoed across the medieval world, Mansa Musa. In the 14th century, much of Europe was struggling. Wars were constant. Diseases spread rapidly. Wealth was limited to a few kingdoms. At the same time, far away in West Africa, an empire was rising quietly, but powerfully. An empire built not on chaos, but on organization, trade, and knowledge. This was the Mali Empire. The Mali Empire emerged in the early 1200s in West Africa. It covered parts of what are now Mali, Senegal, Guinea, Niger, and beyond. Its location was not accidental. Mali sat directly on the most important trade routes of the medieval world. These routes crossed the Sahara Desert, connecting West Africa to North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Gold flowed through these routes. Salt flowed through these routes. And whoever controlled them controlled wealth. At the time, Mali produced more than half of the world's known gold supply. Gold was not just decoration, it was the foundation of global trade. Kings depended on it. Economies depended on it. But Mali was not only rich in resources. It was rich in structure. Cities such as Timbuktu, Gao, and Djenné became major centers of trade and governance. Merchants from distant lands arrived. Scholars followed. Ideas traveled alongside goods. This was not a hidden civilization. It was a global one. In 1312, a new ruler ascended the throne of Mali. His name was Mansa Musa. He inherited a strong empire, but he transformed it into a legend. Mansa Musa ruled with authority, discipline, and vision. He strengthened Mali's borders, improved administration, and ensured peace across vast territories. But unlike many rulers, Mansa Musa did not see wealth as something to hoard. He saw it as something to use, to build, to educate, to influence. Yet, the event that made him famous across the world was not a battle. It was a journey. In 1324, Mansa Musa set out on a pilgrimage to Mecca. This journey would change how the world viewed Africa forever. He did not travel alone. Historical records describe a massive caravan, tens of thousands of people. Soldiers, officials, servants, and attendants. Hundreds of camels, each carrying enormous quantities of gold. Wherever Mansa Musa passed, he gave generously. To the poor. To scholars. To leaders. When he reached Egypt, his generosity became legendary. So much gold entered the economy that its value dropped sharply. Prices rose. Markets were disrupted. For years, Egypt struggled to recover. One African ruler, simply by traveling, had altered regional economies. News of this spread quickly. Stories traveled to Europe. Mapmakers began drawing Mansa Musa on their maps, seated on a throne, holding gold. Africa was no longer seen as distant or insignificant. It was powerful. And it demanded attention. But Mansa Musa's greatest legacy was not gold. It was knowledge. When he returned to Mali, he invested heavily in education, architecture, and scholarship. He built mosques, schools, and libraries across the empire. Timbuktu became one of the most important centers of learning in the medieval world. Scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, and philosophy. Thousands of manuscripts were written, copied, and preserved. Many of them still exist today. Knowledge flowed through Mali just as freely as wealth. This challenges a powerful myth, the idea that Africa had no advanced civilizations before colonization. The Mali Empire proves otherwise. Africa had universities. Africa had global trade. Africa had economic influence. Mansa Musa did not conquer the world with armies. He conquered it with organization, intelligence, and vision. Even centuries later, historians still struggle to measure his wealth. Not because it was small, but because it was almost unimaginable. Yet, his true importance goes beyond riches. Mansa Musa showed the world that Africa was capable of greatness long before modern times. That African civilizations shaped global history. This was the Mali Empire. This was Africa at its height. If stories like this matter to you, stories of African power, wisdom, and history, then subscribe and stay with this channel. Because there are many more stories the world needs to remember.